Disney said, gee, or Bob Iger said, gee, if you really want to sell your company, if you're thinking about selling it, because we were talking about retirement and what are you going to do after all this kind of stuff.
George Lucas built one of the most successful movie franchises in history by following a simple rule. His vision comes first, everything else comes second. For more than 40 years, he controlled every detail of the Star Wars universe, from the biggest space battles to the smallest alien creature. When actors tried to change his plans or add their own ideas, they didn't get dramatic confrontations or heated arguments. They simply didn't get hired. Lucas approaches making movies like an engineer building a machine. Every part has a specific job to do, and every piece must work perfectly with all the others. He sees actors not as creative partners who help tell the story, but as tools that deliver exactly what he has already planned. When a tool doesn't work the way he needs it to, he doesn't try to fix it or work around it. He finds a different tool that does exactly what he wants. Over the years, Lucas spent billions of dollars creating his fictional worlds, and he never let any single performer mess up that perfection. Some famous actors came to him expecting to collaborate, to develop their characters, and to bring their own creative ideas to the roles. They forgot that they were entering a universe that was already complete in Lucas's mind, where every word had been carefully chosen and every action served the bigger story he wanted to tell. When these actors tried to negotiate or suggest changes, Lucas didn't argue with them or try to convince them to see things his way. He simply moved forward without them, finding other performers who understood the rules of his galaxy. These stories aren't about creative differences or artistic disagreements. They're about what happens when some of Hollywood's biggest stars met a director who would not bend and discovered that in Lucas's universe, there are no negotiations, only results. Kurt Russell's failed partnership. Kurt Russell seemed like the perfect fit for the Star Wars universe. He was tough, charismatic, and had already proven himself as an action hero in movies like Escape from New York and The Thing. In the early 1980s, when Lucas was planning Return of the Jedi, Russell's name appeared on every fan's wish list as a possible replacement for Harrison Ford's Han Solo character. The problem wasn't that Russell lacked talent. He had already shown he could handle action scenes and deliver memorable performances. The real issue was that Russell came from a different school of filmmaking, one where he had worked with directors like John Carpenter, who treated actors as equal creative partners. Russell expected to help shape his characters, suggest changes to dialogue, and influence where the story went. Lucas expected him to show up, hit his marks, and say his lines exactly as written. Their single meeting became famous in Hollywood for all the wrong reasons. Russell came prepared with ideas about expanding whatever role he might play. He wanted to add backstory to the character and create story arcs that would continue through multiple films. He spoke passionately about how actors have a responsibility to bring depth and meaning to science fiction and fantasy movies. Lucas listened politely to all of Russell's ideas, then reportedly told his casting director that Kurt wanted to be a partner, but he already had partners, and they were called producers. The conversation reached its breaking point when Russell suggested that Star Wars could benefit from more quiet, human moments between all the big action sequences and special effects. Lucas stared at him for 10 seconds, then said that the spectacle was the human moment. Russell left the meeting without getting a role, and Lucas moved forward with actors who understood that in his universe, characters exist to serve the story, not the other way around. Russell never publicly criticized Lucas afterward, but people in the industry noticed the cold atmosphere between them at Hollywood events. Lucas continued casting actors who could disappear into costumes and makeup without demanding deep psychological reasons for every sword fight or space battle. William Hurt's method problem. William Hurt represented everything George Lucas tried to avoid when casting his movies. Hurt was known for his internal complexity, his careful preparation for roles, and his obsession with finding emotional truth in every character he played. When Lucas began casting for the prequel trilogy in the late 1990s, Hurt's name came up for several important roles. Lucas rejected every suggestion with growing frustration. Hurt's approach to acting was legendary in Hollywood. He would spend months researching his roles, developing detailed backstories, and finding psychological entry points into every character. Most directors valued this kind of dedication and preparation. For Lucas, it was completely incompatible with how he made movies. The prequels operated on tight schedules with extensive digital effects work. There was no time for exploration, discovery, or lengthy character development sessions. The breaking point came during early discussions for Attack of the Clones. Hurt had expressed interest in playing a Jedi Master, and his representatives arranged a preliminary meeting with Lucas. Hurt arrived having spent time researching various philosophical traditions that might inform how a character would connect to the Force. He wanted to discuss the spiritual implications of wielding such power and how it might show up in subtle behavioral choices and small acting moments. Lucas reportedly interrupted him 20 minutes into the conversation, saying it was just space magic where you point, wave, and things move. Hurt kept trying to explain how he could bring dignity and weight to the role through careful attention to the character's internal journey and psychological development. Lucas ended the meeting by telling him that the internal journey happens in post-production, during editing and special effects work. The role eventually went to Christopher Lee, who understood that playing a Sith Lord required presence and authority, not deep psychological exploration. Lee delivered his lines with Shakespearean dignity, while understanding that the real performance would emerge through digital enhancement and John Williams's musical score. Hurt continued building complex characters in smaller, more intimate dramas. Lucas continued building galaxies without him. Kevin Spacey's performance problem. Kevin Spacey had the calculating intelligence that could have made him perfect for playing a Star Wars villain. His ability to project menace underneath a civilized surface seemed tailor-made for the Sith characters. But Lucas discovered that Spacey's greatest strength as an actor became his biggest weakness as a collaborator. He was always performing, even when the cameras weren't rolling. During early development of Revenge of the Sith, Spacey's name came up for General Grievous before the character became fully digital. The role required an actor who could bring mechanical precision to human movement, creating a bridge between live-action performance and digital enhancement. Spacey seemed ideal until Lucas realized he couldn't turn off his acting instincts. In their only substantial meeting, Spacey treated every conversation like an audition. He changed his voice, adjusted his posture, and delivered every response with theatrical timing. When Lucas explained the technical requirements of performing against blue screens with tennis balls representing other characters, Spacey immediately began demonstrating how he would adapt his technique. He performed reactions to imaginary aliens and delivered sample dialogue with different inflections and interpretations. The final problem came when Spacey suggested script changes that would give Grievous more psychological complexity. He wanted to explore the character's relationship with his cybernetic transformation and the loss of his organic identity. Lucas realized that Spacey viewed every role as an opportunity to display his acting skills rather than serve the larger story being told. Grievous became entirely digital, voiced by Matthew Wood, who understood that sometimes the most effective performance is the one that nobody notices. The character served its function in the story without calling attention to the performer behind it. Gary Oldman's transformation threat: Gary Oldman could become anyone. That chameleon-like ability made him one of the most respected character actors in movies, but it also made George Lucas deeply uncomfortable. Lucas built his universe on consistency and control. Oldman represented creative chaos that could reshape entire scenes through pure force of talent. The conflict emerged during casting for The Phantom Menace. Oldman was considered for multiple roles, from Jedi Masters to Sith Lords to supporting characters throughout the galaxy. His range seemed unlimited, and his commitment to every role was absolute. But Lucas quickly realized that Oldman's greatest gift was also his greatest threat to the director's vision. Oldman approached each potential role as a complete reinvention. He didn't just read lines from the script. He created alternate personalities that could fundamentally change how entire scenes played out. During a reading for a minor Senate character, Oldman created an entire accent, physical manner, and political philosophy that transformed 2 pages of basic dialogue into a complex portrait of galactic politics. It was brilliant acting that would have completely overwhelmed the scene's actual purpose. The decisive moment came when Oldman suggested that his character could have connections to other planets, creating opportunities for expanded storylines in future films. Lucas realized that Oldman thought like a creative collaborator, wanting to build a shared universe rather than simply serving as an employee delivering a predetermined vision. The roles went to actors who could deliver competent performances without reshaping the galaxy around their characters. Oldman continued transforming into unforgettable characters in other movie franchises. Lucas continued building his empire with performers who understood that in Star Wars, the universe itself was the star. Anthony Hopkins' overwhelming presence. Anthony Hopkins commanded respect wherever he appeared. His mere presence elevated any material, transformed simple scenes into memorable moments, and brought dignity to any production. For George Lucas, that was precisely the problem. Hopkins was too powerful for the Star Wars universe, too magnetic to serve as anything other than the center of attention. The opportunity arose during development of the prequel trilogy when Hopkins expressed genuine interest in joining the saga. Studio executives were thrilled. Having Hannibal Lecter himself as a Jedi Master would bring prestige and adult credibility to what critics often dismissed as children's entertainment. Lucas was terrified by the prospect. Hopkins operated on a different level than other actors. His preparation was legendary, his technique was flawless, and his screen presence was overwhelming. In any scene, audiences would focus on Hopkins regardless of what other characters were doing or saying. Lucas had spent decades crafting a universe where spectacle and mythology took precedence over individual performances. Hopkins would have shifted that balance simply by existing in the film. Their conversation about potential roles revealed the fundamental incompatibility. Hopkins mentioned his interest in working with Lucas to develop the character's story arc across multiple films, bringing his own ideas about how the character should grow and change. Lucas politely explained that character arcs were already predetermined and served specific narrative functions that couldn't be altered. Hopkins nodded thoughtfully, understanding that he was being politely dismissed. The roles went to actors who could deliver wisdom and authority without overwhelming the scenes with their personal magnetism. Hopkins continued commanding screens in prestigious dramas. Lucas continued building worlds where no single element overshadowed the mythological whole. Sean Connery's ultimate rejection. The biggest rejection in Star Wars history happened behind closed doors, but its impact echoed through decades of casting decisions. Sean Connery was offered the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original trilogy and turned it down, reportedly calling the script incomprehensible nonsense. Lucas never forgot that dismissal. And when opportunities arose to work with Connery years later, the director's response was swift and permanent. Never again. Connery's rejection wasn't just professional disagreement. It felt personal to Lucas. The Scottish actor had read the script for A New Hope and reportedly told his agent that science fiction was beneath his artistic standards. He compared it unfavorably to serious dramatic roles and suggested that Lucas was wasting his time on juvenile fantasy. The role went to Alec Guinness, who understood that bringing dignity to genre material was an art form in itself. The real damage came years later when Connery's representatives reached out during prequel development. Age and changing attitudes toward genre films had given the actor new perspective, and he expressed interest in playing an elder Jedi or Sith character. Lucas refused to take any meetings with him or his representatives. He had built Star Wars into a global phenomenon without Connery's help, and wasn't interested in validating the actor's change of heart. The rejection was absolute and final. When studio executives suggested that Connery's presence could add gravitas to Attack of the Clones, Lucas reportedly responded that Connery had his chance to add gravitas, but chose to add nothing instead. The director had learned an important lesson. Star Wars didn't need establishment credibility from traditional dramatic actors. It had created its own credibility and its own standards of excellence. The franchise succeeded by following its own vision, rather than conforming to Hollywood's existing hierarchies and prejudices. The power of saying no. George Lucas proved that in his galaxy, the director's vision reigned supreme above all other considerations. He didn't need Hollywood's biggest names or most respected actors to build cinema's most enduring and profitable franchise. His success came from understanding exactly what he wanted to create and never compromising that vision for anyone or anything. Each of these rejected actors went on to have successful careers in other projects that better suited their talents and working methods. Kurt Russell continued being an action hero in films that allowed him creative input. William Hurt found complex characters in intimate dramas that rewarded his methodical approach. Gary Oldman transformed into unforgettable characters in franchises that celebrated his chameleon abilities. Anthony Hopkins commanded screens in prestige films that showcased his overwhelming presence. Sean Connery maintained his legendary status without ever entering Lucas's galaxy. The lesson of these rejections isn't that these actors lacked talent or that Lucas was difficult to work with. Instead, it demonstrates the power of having a clear vision and the discipline to stick to it, regardless of external pressure or tempting alternatives. Lucas understood that great movies aren't made by assembling the most famous actors or the most respected names. They're made by finding the right people who understand and can serve the story being told. Sometimes the most powerful creative force is simply knowing when to say no, even to incredibly talented people who might seem like obvious choices. Lucas built his empire not by accepting what Hollywood offered him, but by insisting on exactly what his vision required. In the end, that uncompromising approach created something far more valuable than any individual performance could have provided: a complete, consistent universe that has entertained audiences for generations and will continue to do so long after any single actor's career has ended.